What's up, everybody? Welcome to our inaugural episode of The Pro Show. I'm Thomas Crow, and I still have Mr. Brian Powers with me today. And for our first episode, we just want to let you guys know that we are sponsored by the Legends of Indiana Golf Club.
Yes, and because of that, we have decided to bring one of the owners of the Legends, also FCHS golf coach in here, Ted Bishop, and he is going to talk about some of his stories throughout the years as owner of the Legends, through his time with the PGA Tour, and just a wealth of knowledge in golf. So, Ted, welcome.
Hey, thanks, and I guess if you sponsor yourself, you can buy airtime.
Yeah, you can come in no matter what.
That's the reason I'm here.
So, 38th PGA president, right? Tell us just some of the, what goes into getting elected the president, and then just some of the stuff throughout the term.
Yeah, it's a pretty extensive process on becoming an officer with the PGA of America. There's an election process. The way the PGA of America is structured, Thomas, there are 41 PGA sections, and they don't obviously all follow the state boundaries. Indiana does. But, you go through this election process, you go around the country, you attend district meetings, you give speeches, you have a campaign platform that's pretty specific to PGA members and their needs, professionally and from a career standpoint. And then everybody shows up at the annual meeting. There's still some last-minute campaigning and politicking that goes on at wherever our annual meeting is, and there's a vote taken at the annual meeting, and the person that has majority of the votes wins. And I ran twice. The first time I got beat on the third ballot, and the second time I ran and got elected as an officer was in 2008, and then I became president. You do two years as secretary, 2 years as vice president, and then you're president of the association for 2 years. And I was president in 2013 and 14. And the PGA of America is the largest working sports organization in the world today. We have 28,000 members and apprentices, and it's an active association.
Okay.
So that time, the 2008 to 2014, what kind of responsibilities did you have from each different section, like the secretary to the vice president to the president?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're the secretary, you're basically in charge of membership issues. And one of the things that you do is you serve as chairman of our PGA Board of Control, which is it's very similar to the Supreme Court of the United States from a membership standpoint. And we would meet quarterly, and we would hear a whole lot of different membership case issues. These could be disciplinary related, they could be membership related, but I suppose, and I'd served on this PGA Board of Control for 4 years prior to becoming an officer, and then chaired it for 2 years as secretary. So I suppose in my 6 years of being on the Board of Control, I probably was in on over 1,000 membership cases. Then the 2 years that you're vice president, you're the finance chairman, so you oversee the budget for the PGA of America. And at that time, we were operating on about $165 million a year budget, so there's a big responsibility in that regard. And then when you're president, you're the face of the association.
Now, with all of that, and you... was that your full-time job, or were you helping run the Legends too?
No, that is strictly a voluntary position with the PGA of America. Fortunately, I have business partners, and they were very understanding with my situation. But no, you don't get paid anything. The PGA pays your expenses, your travel expenses, and other any related expenses you would have had while you served in the job. But you do not get paid to do it, so I was employed full-time at the Legends as well as doing that. The travel escalation accelerates as you move up through the chairs, and the 2 years that I was president of the PGA of America, I traveled well over 360 days in those 2 years. Those would have been days I was away from my facility, so that was roughly half the time.
Yeah.
And not only was I, I had understanding business partners, but my wife didn't travel with me all the time either, so she was understanding as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read online that you had, one quote said that in your 2 years of presidency, it got done 10 years of work. What are some of the things you're most proud of from your candidacy?
I think that my situation was interesting in the fact that I came in at a time where one of the first things we did was we hired a new CEO to the PGA of America. That's obviously a high-paid position, but it was someone that didn't.
He gets paid,
He gets
but
paid.
you don't.
Not the
Yeah.
face.
You hire him. You hire him. He
Right.
gets-
Yeah, I hire him and I'm his boss. He got paid and I didn't. But at any rate, it was an individual, Pete Bavacqua, who's now the president of NBC Sports, who had not had a lot of historical knowledge of the PGA of America. Prior to that, he had worked for the United States Golf Association before coming to work for the PGA of America, and was actually employed by one of the largest sports agencies in New York when we hired him as our CEO. But it put me in a position where I was probably uncharacteristically more the face and the voice of the PGA of America than previous presidents had been, because our previous CEOs had been people that had been with the PGA of America when they got into that position. So my role was a lot different than what it had previously been. But back to your original question, I think one of the things that I was really proud of is a lot of people get the PGA Tour and the PGA of America confused. And the PGA Tour is one entity and the PGA of America is another. And the way I describe it is that the people that you watch on TV playing golf for a living every weekend, they are PGA Tour members. Mm-hmm. People like myself who are actively involved in golf facility operations 7 days a week and promoting the game, teaching the game, trying to grow the game at the grassroots level, we make up the PGA of America. Now, the interesting thing, members of the PGA Tour are also, or players on the PGA Tour are also members of the PGA of America. So Phil Mickelson, Tiger Woods, all the top names in golf, those were also my constituents when I was the president of the PGA of America. And believe it or not, we had kind of had this adversarial relationship for a couple of decades with the PGA Tour. And the reason being is that back in the late 60s, the PGA of America, 60s and 1950s, ran the PGA Tour. A group of players, including Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, felt like that the tour could be run better if the players ran it themselves in the PGA of America, so there was a historic split in 1968 where the players went out on their own. They pretty much formed their own tour. They broke away from the PGA of America. And so hence became the PGA Tour as we know it today. And during my time, Tim Finchem, who was the commissioner of the PGA Tour in 2013 when I came in as the president, he reached out to me and he said, it's ridiculous that our two organizations don't work together better than what we do. We have a lot of common interests. And, you and I as leaders need to try to reconcile that. And we did. And we had a great run in those 2 years that really transformed, even through today, the relationship that the PGA Tour and the PGA of America have with each other. And, I think that was probably one of the really, profound and important things that, that I did that carries with it some residual values to PGA members. During my time, we renegotiated our television contract with NBC on our Ryder Cup rights to the tune of $440 million. That was a Ryder Cup extension that took us all the way through 2030. And, that basically put the PGA of America in a financial position going forward where they're pretty much, set for eternity. We took part of that TV revenue that we got, and we found ways to share it with our 41 sections that I referred to, so that they could in turn do something for our members. And one of the complicated things with the PGA of America is that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that we have a thing called inurement restrictions as it relates to what we can do for our members. We can't offer them health insurance. We can't offer them a pension fund, things like that. So it's, even though it's a working sports organization, we're restricted financially in what we can do, for our members. So those revenues that we were able to share with our sections, helped sections provide better educational opportunities, help them hire player development specialists that could go out in the field and help our pros maybe better their operations, do some things like that. So I think that was another, really important thing that I was able to accomplish. And I think probably bringing more exposure and more recognition to the position of president of the PGA of America during my 2 years was important. I mean, I feel like I was viewed as a leader in the industry at that point in time, and I think that it helped also raise the profile of the PGA of America on some of the issues that came up that I know we're going to talk about later in this interview.
Yeah. So one thing I think that as we get further and further away from it is kind of maybe someone like Thomas's age doesn't necessarily understand the impact that Tiger Woods had on golf, and also what Tiger Woods was like when he was kind of at that peak, like that 12-year run from 97 to 2009. Could you kind of go over what he meant to the game, and just what it was like being a part of all of that?
Well, that's really an interesting perspective. I just saw I saw something last week on this very subject, and 1997 would have been the ultimate boom in the business of golf, and a lot of people, would look back at that, and they would look back at where Tiger was in his career, and that would have been, where he was kind of at the peak of his career. So, he got a lot of credit for increasing the interest in the sport. And, I suppose a modern day Tiger Woods would be the equivalent of Babe Ruth in baseball. I don't really know who you would compare him with in any other sports, but here's what's interesting. More people started watching golf on television in the late 90s than ever had before. And no question, probably because of the excitement that somebody like Woods was raising, when they were watching the game. But as an operator, I really question whether there were that many more people that started playing the game because of Tiger Woods. And I guess where I would really kind of substantiate, what I'm saying is that if there's one area that golf could stand to grow in from a participation standpoint, it would be with our minority participation. And I'm not sure that we saw the growth in minority participation, which you would have naturally figured that we would have seen when you had an African-American superstar, first ever in the history of golf, like Tiger Woods. So I think I would give Tiger Woods a tremendous amount of credit for raising the TV viewing audiences in golf, but I'm not so convinced that he had that much to do with the actual participation that took place in golf. And certainly his career evolved and he continued to play great, into the next century, into the 2000s, and even up through. I mean, my first year as president in 2013, he won 5 PGA Tour events, but golf started this decline, early in the 2000s. So I'm just not one that really buys into the fact that Woods did that much to really grow the sport, other than create a lot of interest in TV viewership. I think the guy that really was responsible for the immediate surge in golf, which started in the late 50s and 1960s, was more Arnold Palmer than it was Tiger Woods.
That makes sense if you think about it, just because it's, Tiger Woods was always kind of appointment viewing, and it's easier to, watch a sport you've never played where you can root for someone, but necessarily going out and playing golf is a completely different thing. So.
Well, and what I failed to say, and what would back up my statement is, I was privilege to a lot of TV viewer rating information because the PGA of America owns the PGA Championship. We own the Ryder Cup. And we were always very sensitive to who was watching golf on TV and how many people were and what the demographics were. And the interesting thing is that the vast, vast majority of people who watch golf on TV do not play the sport, which is pretty curious, really.
Right.
But and so that's kind of the basis for that statement.
Well, I think it also brings a generalization aspect to it of, for as you were saying, Arnold Palmer might be for the older generation, but like a guy like Tiger Woods or more recently Jordan Spieth for my generation, somebody who's uneducated in the golf system might hear Arnold Palmer and think, wow, I love his sweet tee.
Right.
But someone else in the older generation might say, oh, Arnold Palmer, that's one of the best players of all time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think every sport you have generational superstars that obviously whatever that generation is are going to relate to. But getting back to Arnold Palmer, for example, I mean, he came into golf at a time where you didn't see a lot of golf on television. The advent of colored TV, particularly in terms of Masters coverage, was a tremendous boost to interest in viewership on golf on TV. All of a sudden, people were seeing these beautiful golf courses that were manicured, tremendously, and in the case of Augusta National, in the spring with all the flowers and everything that were out, and all of a sudden, it created a lot more excitement in the sport. And then, Palmer came along at a time where, the 8 major championships that he won them in a window from 1958 to 1962. And he was this swashbuckling, good-looking, fit, bombing off the tee type player with kind of an unorthodox swing that was he was a risk reward type player, and he was, for his era, I mean, he was like none other. Woods won a lot more, but in terms of being groundbreaking, Arnold kind of started it, and then you had Nicklaus that became Palmer's rival, and who a lot of people resented when Jack came along. Jack was kind of this heavier, not as good looking, not as glamorous type player as what Palmer was, and so there were a lot of golf fans that resented Jack, when he came along, and every year has had that. But there's no question. I mean, Tiger Woods is the Michael Jordan equivalent, of golf in terms of just what the average sports fan, you ask him anything, who would you say is the most famous person that's ever picked a golf club up? And the answer would be Tiger Woods.
Yeah. So kind of going off of something you said earlier, just about the golf courses and everything. I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the Masters, and they had been to the Masters a couple times and Augusta, and they just said there was just something about that place, and about you have all these expectations for it, you go in and you're not disappointed. Can you kind of add on to that? I mean, what is it about Augusta National?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I would preface that by saying in my lifetime, I mean, I've been very fortunate based on the position that I was in to be there a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was a rules official at 6 Masters. I played Augusta National 5 times, and I would totally agree with that statement. I made that comment myself. I mean, you never had a bad day at Augusta National, and I think the history, the exclusivity of where you were at. But for me, being in the golf business, here's what I thought was the most exciting part of it. For a long, long time, those of us in the North who were involved in the business of golf would almost look at Masters Week as the unofficial beginning of the next golf season. And with it, coming out of the tournament would be a lot of excitement from people around the country to play golf. Okay, they've been cooped up all winter in their houses. The weather's been bad. Now the weather's starting to break in early April almost everywhere around the country, and They sit there in front of their TV set. They see these beautiful courses. They see these, these golfers decked out to the nines, and they cannot wait, the week after that thing's over with to get out and start playing themselves. So it was almost like it's the ceremonial beginning of the season. And then to be there and to have everyone in the world who is anybody in golf be there makes it that much more special if you're part of that whole experience. If you're lucky to be to be there and doing it. And of course it's probably to this day one of the toughest tickets in sports to get as a spectator.
Right.
So it's hard for spectators to get there, and even if you're in a leadership position, you never take for granted everything that you're able to do when you're there. And I mean, to be able to be in and out of the clubhouse, to be able to be in and out of the locker rooms, to be able to be on the range tee, to be, we'd go to our rules officials meetings on, those were usually on the Tuesday before the tournament started on Thursday. And everybody, there would be like 100 to 110 rules officials that were going to work the tournament that week, and they would be there from all over the world. And you would stand up, you would introduce yourself, you would say how many Masters you have worked. And I mean, you're working with people from Australia, South Africa, China, the United States, the UK. I mean, it's just it's almost like a surreal experience when you're there.
Yeah. So after your removal from your presidency spot, you decided
removal. It's like his time was up, right? The time was up, right?
Well, we'll get into that. So
more or less.
Yeah. So you decided to write a tell-all book titled Unfriended. And so, one, just tell me the process of how writing that book occurred, and then secondly, the reasoning for releasing it when you did.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's, I had a very celebrated career as PGA president. There's no question about that, and with that comes good things and comes bad things. I guess the bad things would be is that when you're in a leadership position and you're not afraid to express opinions, you're not afraid to take stands, you're not afraid to make, particularly inside the organization, make personnel decisions that need to be made for the betterment of the association, you can't help but alienate some people over time. It's almost like coaching. It's the more years you're in the job, the bigger the posse gets, so to speak. So in my case, I was controversial, and with that, you make enemies, and I think that we came out of the Ryder Cup in September of 2014, and we lost again. Tom Watson was the Ryder Cup captain that I had named, and obviously on the Sunday night after the Ryder Cup matches were over with, we had a press conference in the media center at Glen Eagles, and Phil Mickelson called out Tom, as the captain at that press conference. It was very unprofessional. It was the things he said were uncalled for, and it was a bad situation. And I think Mickelson, would admit that, and no doubt regrets what he did. But anyway, what happened was it's like you had this line that formed in the sand. And you had Tom Watson on one side of the line, and you had Phil Mickelson on the other side of the line. And it was easy for a lot of people to migrate to Phil because Phil still had time left, and he was going to be a Ryder Cup captain someday. And here was Tom, who had been an outstanding captain, so much so that Pete Bavacqua, our CEO, said to me the Tuesday of the Ryder Cup matches, if we win this, why would we not bring Tom back as our captain next time? That's a testimony to the job that he had done in the lead up to the Ryder Cup. And the fact of the matter is, when we got into the competition, our team got beat soundly. We got beat by over 35 shots in 3 days, and we were missing Tiger Woods, we were missing Dustin Johnson, we were missing Jason Duffner, who was the defending PGA champion, all due to injuries of some type. And when you compared the two teams, the Europeans had the superior team. But there was a lot of fallout after that Ryder Cup. A lot of criticism, towards Tom about being too old, being unrelatable to today's players. Criticism to me for picking him as the captain. And it was a tough time. And I was working at a junior deal that Nick Faldo was putting on at the Greenbrier, and I hadn't read much all week in the way of golf, and I saw some comments that Ian Poulter had made, who was on the European Ryder Cup team, about Faldo when he was captain of the Ryder Cup, and also about Watson. And they were just things that I felt, again, were uncalled for, and kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And as a result of that, I took to social media, Twitter and Facebook, and I referred to Poulter as a little girl in some of the comments that he made. And there became a firestorm, and the one lesson that I quickly learned on Twitter is I had 5,000 followers on my Twitter account, and Poulter had 1.5 million in his account. So you don't pick a fight on Twitter with somebody that's, got that type of following. So I started getting killed on social media. People were calling me, labeled me as a sexist, said all kinds of really bad things about me, and the PGA of America felt inclined to remove me from my position as president when I had 29 days, to go in my term. So I never really had the opportunity to kind of tell my side of the story, and I don't. The book does a nice job of that in the first couple of chapters, and I don't want to really get into the ins and outs of my removal, but I never really had a chance to tell my side of the story, particularly on how those circumstances went down. So the book became, a good way, for me to do it in my own words and have it not be unedited. Now, the book did not come without a challenge to write, because the PGA of America did not want me to write this book, and they started, through their chief legal counsel out of Washington, D.C., they started, really kind of challenging me on my ability to write it. So I, in turn, had to hire one of the top First Amendment law firms, also located in Washington, D.C., to help me write the book. Now, fortunately, there were some golfers in that firm. They were very sympathetic with my First Amendment right to express myself, and they made me a great deal on the legal fees that they charged me to help me, be able to publish that book. And I think at the end of the day, one of the most satisfying things to me was I agreed to give the PGA of America the opportunity to pre-read that book before it was published. And I did that because I wanted to be able to say when the book was published and it was on the market that 100% of everything you read in that book about the PGA of America or anything that happened during my time as president is true, based on the fact that the association had the opportunity to pre-read that and challenge anything that was in the book. And, at the end of the day, there were just minor changes, that were made to the book after they did the pre-read, nothing that really affected any of the messages that I was trying to convey. But the book is mostly just about people and stories on things that happened, in those 2 years during my time as president. And they really were two of the more historical modern day years based on, the anchoring controversy that was going on and just, some other things in the sport. So, the book, when it, it came out in 2016, and it was, it was the #1 selling golf book on Amazon for several weeks, and I was pleased with the reception it got by the people that did take the time to read it. The politics in golf are interesting, and unfortunately, the book, from a national media exposure, never probably got the promotion that it deserved to get, because you had this 800-pound elephant in the room called the PGA of America that has influence over all kinds of media outlets in the country. So it is what it is.
Okay, so kind of pivoting off of your PGA presidency and moving, before we do that, as someone who watches many Ryder Cups, I'll say any Ian Poulter slander will be backed up here. So anytime you say anything about Ian Poulter, I'm right here saying, "Yep, sounds good to me."
He's a great player, and he was a thorn in the side of Americans for many years. I respect him. I like the guy. It was a harmless comment.
He seems he's a great player. He seems like a great player. So so you are part owner of the Legends. That's been here since 96, was it?
92.
92, okay. How did that come about? Getting a course that, that beautiful and all the plans for that. How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, well, I was approached by, a couple of guys, one of which was Bob Knight, the basketball coach at Indiana at the time, about, building a public golf course on the south side of Indianapolis. That was at a point in time where golf was really growing a lot, and asked me if I'd be interested in running the operation and also having part ownership in the facility, and that had been, really one of my professional goals and dreams was to, being on the ownership level of a facility. So that's kind of how the idea spawned, and we were, in particular, we were looking at Johnson County, and we, ironically, the first piece of property that we looked at is not far from our high school, where we're doing this right now. It was out on Centerline Road, and we thought we had a deal. The landowner raised the price of the ground on us at the 11th hour, so that kind of threw that one out of the picture, and we wound up really with a better location off of Hurricane Road, closer to I-65 than what we have now. But we bought a 390-acre tract of land in 1991, and opened the original 18 holes on August 29th of 1992, expanded to 27 championship holes in a par 3 course in 1996, had the Indiana Golf Office relocate to our property in the late 90s, and been doing it ever since.
And something that people might not know about Ted, and I can tell you firsthand, Ted does not always just do the management stuff. He is out there on the tractor and getting all that stuff done with the grass too.
Well, I went to college. I graduated from Purdue in 1976, and I had a degree in agronomy and turf management. So, when I came out of college, I really thought I was going to be a golf course superintendent. And the first job that I got out of college was in Linton, Indiana, at the Phil Harris Golf Course. And they hired me because of my agronomy skills as a superintendent, but I had to make my living doing the things that the pro did. So I was a pro superintendent, and I did that for 17 years there, and was there when I came to Franklin. I've been in the business for 45 years, and I've really only had 2 jobs. But the outside part of it, the turf management end of it, is something that I have always enjoyed, a lot, and I really enjoy. You're right in what you say, Thomas. That's what I spend the bulk of my time, doing now. And I think the thing that's, if you look at my career, and I've spoken to a lot of high school classes, college classes, and the message that I've always given, younger people is keep all your options open. You all think where your career is going to take you. You think what you want to do, and you could look at me as a prime example. I graduated with a degree in agronomy. I didn't play golf in high school. I played tennis, basketball, and baseball. My dad didn't play golf. So if someone would have told me in 1976 that in 2013 and 14 I would be president of the PGA of America, I would have said, you got the wrong guy. You got me confused with somebody else. So you just never know where your career might take you. I would say that to you. I've been interviewed by Jim Nance and Dan Hicks, and someday I'll probably say I was also interviewed by Thomas Crow.
He's saying that to you. He's not saying it to me. I'm stuck.
Your ship is sailed.
Yeah. Keep all your options open. Well, not you, Brian. You don't have as many options.
All right. Well, Ted, before we go, I just have one more kind of interesting question for you. You're very, very humble about the people that you've interacted with. You say Bob Knight's name like it's just another guy for
Thomas
you.
Crow.
So, tell me just if you had a foursome that you had to play with, so yourself and 3 others, who would you play with? Of people you've played with before.
Of people that I've played with before. Okay. Well, I probably wouldn't put Bob Knight in that foursome because he was not necessarily the most relaxing guy to play with. But, that's a hard question because, particularly during my time as president of the PGA of America, I played with Phil Mickelson. I played with Tom Watson. I played with Keegan Bradley. I played with Bubba Watson. I played with Rory McIlroy. I played with Adam Scott. I mean, I could keep going in terms of tour players, that I played with. I would rather make a foursome up of people that I never played with, and I would.
Us, me and Thomas.
Obviously, besides the two of you. John Crow or John Byerly, Bill Doty. I would pick Arnold Palmer. I mean, I got to know Arnold Palmer really well. Arnold Palmer's dad, Deacon Palmer, his background was very similar to mine. He was the only teacher that Arnold Palmer ever had, so he could teach golf, but he got into the business as a superintendent. He helped build the Latrobe Country Club, which is where Palmer grew up. He ultimately owned the Latrobe Country Club, and Deacon Palmer was a very imposing figure who had a lot of influence, on his son Arnold. Those two would be in that foursome. The other person that I would put in that foursome would be John Kennedy, and I love history. And when I was 7 years old, actually 6 years old, I'd been on my 7th birthday in 1960. My dad got me out of the first grade, and I stayed home and I watched the inauguration of Kennedy. And I was into the presidents and history a lot, when I was a really young boy. But I've just been totally enamored by the Kennedy mystique, the Kennedy presidency. And I'll tell you a great story on John Kennedy and Arnold Palmer. Kennedy was supposed to play golf with Arnold Palmer in October of 1963, and it didn't happen because Kennedy was having some back issues. And the week before Kennedy was assassinated, he sent Palmer some old, I don't know what they would have been, 10 millimeter, 16 millimeter movie reels, that he had of his swing. And, he asked Arnold Palmer to watch those movies and critique his swing, since they didn't have the opportunity to play together the previous month. And of course, a week later, Kennedy's assassinated, and none of that happens. But I've thought about that. Somebody asked me this question. I did a podcast for the Indiana Golf Association a month ago, and this wasn't my foursome. And the more I thought about it, I thought this would have been my foursome: Palmer, his dad, and John Kennedy, because I think it would have been really interesting to have seen the interaction between Palmer and Kennedy on Kennedy's swing.
So when you look back kind of on the legends and just opening that and everything, what are you most proud of with that?
Well, public golf in Central Indiana has been really challenging. And when we built the Legends and opened in the mid-'90s, it was almost like the Field of Dreams adage, where if you build it, they will come. And every golf course was busy. They had more business than they knew what to do with. And then between 95 and 2000, there were close to 30 public golf courses that were built in Central Indiana. So now all of a sudden the market got oversaturated with golf courses. Golf became what I would call a consumer-controlled business, and everybody was it was a struggle. People were really struggling to stay in business. I mean, in fact, we filed Chapter 11 in 2010, and we were the first of like 16 or 17 golf courses in our area to do that. But we came out of that restructured, and we've survived, and now we've prospered. As the years have gone by, and we've figured out some ways to change our business model. But it's been an endurance contest, and the challenging thing about golf, and there's no better example than 2020 with a pandemic, as many businesses as have struggled, in these times. I mean, restaurants, for example, a lot of the service industry businesses have really taken a beating this year. Well-known facts, but golf across the country is up 22 to 28%, and it's just really strange that it would take a disaster like a pandemic to all of a sudden give golf this shot of life, which it's gotten because it's deemed to be a safe outdoor recreation, and obviously there's not a lot of other things that people can do today.
Right.
So they migrated to golf this summer, and people in the industry are very optimistic that this trend will continue into 2021 and possibly into the future.
And if you need a place to golf, our sponsor today is the Legends Golf Club, as we mentioned. Ted, we appreciate you taking some of your time out of the day for us, telling us some pretty fun stories that we appreciated. Any more for us?
No, I just appreciate you guys having the opportunity to have me on, and you're very fortunate. When I went to college, I was first majored in radio and TV and journalism, and I kind of wanted to get into that, and I would have given anything to have a facility like you've got here at Franklin Community High School, and people like Brian that can teach you the trade, so to speak.
Yep. Well, for our director, Kevin Hankins, my co-host with his impeccable shave, Brian Powers. Ted, once again, thanks for stopping by. I'm Thomas Crow, and this was the first episode of The Pro Show.